So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Liz Sands. Liz is the outreach coordinator at Common Ground Food Cooperative. She's a Champaign native who studied anthropology at the University of Illinois at Chicago, after which she spent 6 years working as a bartender. Liz is excited to be here today to combine the exciting world of cocktails with teaching about our dynamic food system.
So starting with the Fennel Sage Fizz, we're going to make the simple syrup. So just kind of go over what we need for this class. So everyone should have a little container of sugar. That's 1 cup. You'll need 1 cup of water. And that is pretty much all that goes in to start. The fennel will cut once we get the simple syrup on the stove. And then a little bit down the line, you'll need a mesh strainer, a jar, or it doesn't have to be a mason jar. Any sort of sealable container would be great. Glass is ideal. And then a little bit of salt, and then a knife and cutting board for when we chop everything up. So simple syrup is, as the name indicates, really, really simple. In theory, it's just equal parts sugar and water. That is the base one. Excuse me. Those go in a lot of cocktails and they're so easy to customize. One of my favorites is a honey simple syrup, which actually just uses honey instead of the sugar. And that goes in sort of like a classic Prohibition era cocktail called the Bee's Knees, which is one of my favorites. We're not making that today, but if you Google it, it's available online. But what we're gonna do for this is just dump the sugar. This is a cup measured out, just put it in your pot, and water. And typically salt does not go in simple syrup, but with the fennel, we're gonna add just the tiniest little dash of salt in there too. But you'll just wanna put it on a boil. So what we wanna do is just boil this just until the sugar dissolves. You don't wanna keep it on there any longer than that. So if you wanna get that started, and just stay close by and keep an eye on it because it will come up to temp pretty fast. So just the sugar and the water, a little bit of salt, give it a stir. It'll dissolve pretty quickly. It really doesn't need that much time. So stay close by, but while that is happening, we can go ahead and cut up the fennel, which will go in just after this is done. We'll take it off the heat, put the fennel in, and pop it into the fridge. Ideally, when you're making simple syrup, you wanna let it cool completely. We're just using the bulb for the syrup itself, but definitely save the stems and the fronds, and that can make a nice little garnish for the cocktail. This is going to just sort of infuse in the simple syrup, and it's gonna get strained out, so you really, really don't need to worry about the cuts or how any of this looks. Just kind of give it a nice rough chop. I cut the little ends off as well. So for this one, fennel is actually a really kind of a surprising choice. I typically don't like fennel or anise or licorice or anything like that. I once worked in a kitchen and I had to process like pounds and pounds and pounds of fennel, and it made me feel I had to get out of the kitchen. I really typically don't like it, but in small doses and in this cocktail, it's actually really, really delicious, and it goes so well with the sage. It adds a little bit of sweetness, and it's just really unique. It's just not something that you see often in cocktails. I've seen it once, I think, on a menu, and so I just thought it'd be fun to do something a little creative here. So I have that chopped up, ready to go. Again, don't spend too much time worrying about what that looks like. It's just going to infuse the syrup, and then we're going to strain it out. So mine is almost done, but it's probably only been 2 minutes, so we'll give it some time. So yeah, simple syrup is a great way to just add a little bit of sweetness to a cocktail without overpowering it. It's so easy to make. A bar I worked at for a long time, we didn't actually have simple syrup, but we made drinks that should have required it, and we just did a little bit of sugar and a little bit of water, which in theory works. If you're in a pinch, I've done that at home too, but really, if you just make a big batch, it's good in the fridge for about 2 weeks, and then you can just add little dashes here and there. And yeah, you can really kind of make it your own. Anything, kind of just doing it the way we're doing it now, where you do the base and then add something to sort of infuse it and strain it out. You can really get creative with it. So once this is done, I'll just talk a little bit about the cocktail. Like I said, I tried to keep them pretty simple because we really wanted the flavors of the components you're spending time on and making and those perennial herbs to shine through. So it is pretty simple. It's just the syrup, some vodka, lemon juice, sage, and then topped with a little soda water. The recipes I provided have everything in ounces. So if you have a little cocktail measure, those are great, but I also have them, I'll tell you what they are in tablespoons in case you don't have something like this. Not everybody does, but it's a pretty easy conversion. But this one is super, super local. It's made by Silver Tree Beer and Spirits. They're in Paxton, which is just about, I don't know, 15 miles north of here. And this is their sort of flagship liquor. It's a wheat vodka called Down East, and it's been really popular. I really, really like it. It works well in this cocktail. So I'm gonna turn mine off because mine is done. This is pretty simple. We're just gonna put all the fennel into the pot. Simple syrup should be in the fridge with the fennel, cooling off a little bit. I'll just give it another minute. So moving on to the cocktail, everything that you will need for this. So the vodka, we have the Down East wheat vodka, but any vodka is just fine. There's soda water. You'll need a lemon. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cut that in half right now. I have a citrus squeezer. If you have a reamer, or even if you don't, if you just squeeze it, just make sure that you don't, keep an eye out for any seeds, but these are very, very useful. Again, I have a little measurer, but if you don't, I'll tell you the measurements in tablespoons to make that a little bit easier. I have a fancy gold bar spoon, but any spoon is fine. And then I also have a muddler. So muddlers are super helpful, but you don't really need it. Depending on what you're making, like if you're doing an old fashioned where you really need to get in there with the cherries and the oranges, muddlers are super helpful. For this, we're just gonna be muddling the sage with the simple syrup, and it's just to release a little bit of the aroma and the flavor. So even just kind of the back end of like a really thick spoon, or even just kind of pressing down with a spoon would work just fine. And then a glass, this somehow is the only appropriate sized glass we have here at the co-op, and I forgot to bring mine. But just a basic rocks glass. We don't want it to be too tall. It's kind of a shorter cocktail. It's not a full pint. It's not a martini or anything. So just a rocks glass, and ice. Definitely want ice. All right. So if you're making more than one cocktail, I would recommend not doing it in a batch and just building each one separately in its own glass. As far as the sage goes, there are a wide variety of sizes. So just kind of whatever you think. I'm going to say about 3 if it's on the larger end. And these are fairly uniform. So between 3 and 5, just make sure you get a decent amount in there. Okay, so go ahead and take the simple syrup out of the fridge. Should smell nice and fennelly. So you're going to want a mesh strainer or a sieve, or even if you just have a colander, but we're just going to strain that fennel out and put it right into a jar. So yes, this one. I'm going to use this little one. I'm going to turn around and do this over the sink just in case I make any mistakes, but just go ahead and just pour it directly into the jar. We don't want any fennel in there. We just want the syrup. So if you got any on the edges like I did, I would recommend wiping them down. This is a very, very sticky, sugary substance. Okay, so we will move on to the cocktail. So grab your glass. I'm gonna grab some ice from the fridge. So this one is pretty simple. We're just gonna add a couple sage leaves, again, just kind of based on the size or how much you like sage. I'm gonna do 4. And then we want to do 1 ounce of the simple syrup, which is 2 tablespoons. So if you don't have a measure, just 2 tablespoons is the exact equivalent. Okay, so I'm gonna use my muddler, but again, it's not a huge deal if you don't have one. We just kind of want to start releasing some of the aroma from there. So just give it a couple presses on those sage leaves. And then we're going to do 1.5 ounces of vodka, which is 3 tablespoons if you don't have a measurer. My cup might be a little small for what we're doing here, so hopefully you have a proper size rocks glass. We're going to do half of a lemon juice in there, just directly in there. And go ahead and give that a little stir before we add anything else. I'd recommend topping it, especially because the simple syrup is still a little hot, topping it all the way up with ice. And then just finish it off with a little bit of soda water. And then if you want to, with the fennel, our fridge was a little too cold, so they're looking a little strange, but I'm just gonna leave that out. But if you wanted to add a little sprig of fennel in there, that would be tasty, or definitely a sage garnish would be good. So This is the cocktail. I hope everyone enjoys. I think it's really unique with the sage and the fennel, and it's just a nice springtime cocktail. It's 80 degrees today, which is insane. So it's a nice one for today. Maybe make another one after the class, go sit outside.